Thank you all very much for coming to this lunchtime lecture. It's a very special presentation this morning or this afternoon by Michelle North. Michelle is a veterinarian with a strong interest in ecosystem health, One Health, ecotoxicology, and multi- and interdisciplinary problem solving. After completing her veterinary studies at University of Pretoria, she went on to obtain a doctorate on the effects of urban air pollution on wild birds from the University of Calgary in Canada. She's currently a postdoc researcher at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, investigating the state of climate change adaptation in Africa, and also providing academic support to the Durban office of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Working Group 2 Technical Support Unit. As part of the latter role, she has explored options for answering various unusual questions, such as tracing funding and authorship patterns, which has led to this collaborative work on African authorship in Geoscience. And a comment on that, you will see in the chat box a link for the paper that is being discussed today. Please click on it, please download it and read it. And so with that, Michelle, we really look forward to hearing your presentation today on the underrepresentation of African authors in high-impact geoscience literature. Over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. Also, if anyone is unable to download the paper, feel free just to email the coordinating author, and we will be happy to send you a PDF. I am going to stop my video soon, but I just wanted to have it going when I say hello, and then I'll just shut it off to conserve bandwidth. Today I'm going to be discussing the paper that we published in Earth Science Reviews a couple of months ago, titled Out of Africa, the Underrepresentation of African Authors in High-Impact Geoscience Literature. There are 3 authors on the paper. So it's me, as Tanya kindly introduced me just now, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow at UKZN, and my 2 co-authors are Warwick Hastie, who is a lecturer in rock mechanics, and Lauren Hoyer, lecturer in economic geology, both also at UKZN. So I think we've all heard stories about how international researchers might come, and could be in any field, but in geology in particular. They're very excited to come and explore African geology, and they have a lot of help and assistance from Africans, South Africans, who are happy to show them the outcrops. And all they get is an acknowledgement when this research comes to publication. Obviously, this is a story, and true collaboration can range very widely from international researchers who might come in and work closely with locals and work together to interpret results and publish the findings, all the way through to people coming in without even contacting local researchers and publishing work. We acknowledge that there's a wide range, but what we wanted to do was to try and quantify the extent of the situation of Africans not necessarily being included. It's well known that there's an imbalance in scientific knowledge production, with most research being produced by a very small number of countries. South Africa is the only country in Africa that appears on this sort of majority of publications list. But what we were curious about was what the situation was for geology specifically. As you can see here are 2 examples of papers on very location-specific, African-specific geological deposits, and on both sets of papers, all the authors are from either Belgian or Austrian organizations. In other words, in the list of authors, there's not a single person from Africa. We understand that academic literature only represents a small part of geological knowledge. However, for academics, performing research and reporting it in scientific papers is critical for career progression. Whether slighting by not being included as authors is deliberate or not, it still can hurt the process. There's a concept in the medical fields known as parachute science, where foreign researchers tend to come in and exploit, in whatever way you want to interpret that term, the research landscape in Africa without African scientists being included in the process, either as authors or collaborators, capacity building, however you want to look at it, they're not being included. And it is very interesting, this process is very interesting in the medical fields. It's very noted in vaccine trials and pharmaceutical trials, but it's something that's spoken about, but it needs to be quantified to actually see what the extent of this process is. We do acknowledge that there are many examples of very good, healthy collaboration, but what was interesting to us, particularly for this project, was to see to the extent Africa is left out of developing its own geoscientific knowledge. So, to start with, how we started going about writing this paper. As I said just now, most of the geoscientific knowledge outside of industry is kept in academic journals. However, examining authorship patterns across all geological journals would be quite a Herculean task, and definitely beyond the capacity of its 3 authors. So we decided to restrict ourselves just to the most prestigious journals, because we felt that the presence or absence of African researchers on these articles would be quite informative. We based our journal selection on a ranking of different geology journals based on these 3 metrics that I've got here, H-index, total citations, and the CIMAGO journal ranking, to get a list of the highest ranked or most impactful journals. And then we also limited it to only solid earth journals, because we wanted to avoid looking at multidisciplinary journals, not climate change journals and that kind of thing. So we do acknowledge that we are only looking at a sample of the literature, but we thought that it was relevant to the question that we're asking. In addition, we felt that it would be wise to compare the results that we found in these so-called high impact journals with 2 very well-known African hosted journals, the South African Journal of Geology and the Journal of African Earth Sciences. So here you can see a list of the journals that we ended up looking at. The first 21 are all the so-called high impact journals, and at the bottom of the list there are the 2 African located journals. For every article in these journals, we recorded the number of authors, their country of affiliation, as well as the country where the research was being conducted. So in this talk, I'm going to be calling that topic, so the African topics. So in other words, if a research project was being done in South Africa, it's a South African topic. We did this for all 182,000 articles from these journals. We also then, at a journal level, extracted the number of articles published for every year and the African contribution. We also recorded the authors and their affiliations for the 25 most cited papers for each journal. So that's the most impactful papers per journal. And this is just an example of how we broke down some of the information at the journal level. So you can see the total number of papers, ones that have global topics, ones that have African topics, African authors, and so on. So all of this ended up being compiled to answer these 4 research questions. We wanted to know what the extent these high impact articles are authored by Africans, so African scientists and geologists. What proportion of these articles are about Africa, so based in African regions on African topics? To what extent African geoscience research is conducted by Africans, and how the contribution has changed over time compared with other parts of the world. So one of the sort of tricky definitions in this paper that if anyone does read it, they'll notice is we refer to authorships, which are author publication units. So there's two, I'm not going to go into too much detail with this, but the point is if I wrote this paper and I wrote another paper, I'm counted as two authorships because we don't want the individual author output. So now what some of our results, which is the most interesting part of the presentation. 70% of all articles about Africa did not involve a single African author. That means 30% of papers had one or more African authors, not that 30% had all African authors. Quite astounding. The number of articles on African topics usually exceeds the number of articles written by Africans, which means that much of the work on Africa is published without local collaborators, without local authors. So I know this graph is a little bit complex, but if you just restrict your focus to the black bars initially, these represent the research published about specific geographic locations anywhere in the world. In other words, it's about somewhere in the US or somewhere in Austria. So that's the black bars. Whereas the gray bars represent research on African topics. So in South Africa, in the Congo. As you can see, most journals publish relatively little on African studies. However, these three journals, Precambrian Research, Gondwana Research, and Lithos, do tend to publish relatively more about Africa. As you can see here on the right, the two African located journals, South African Journal in Geology and Journal of African Earth Science, not unexpectedly, tend to publish mostly about African topics. But one might ask, how does this compare with elsewhere in the world? To answer this question, we compared African output with that of the 5 countries producing the most geological research and broke it down by their population. If you look at the number of papers about a country, and I think you can see my mouse, it doesn't look that bad. Africa features quite well, actually features above most of them. However, if you then look to the next row, you can see just how few of those publications are actually written by local authors. When you look down here, you can see that only 30% of African geoscience research is published by locals. And obviously, when you then look at the population level, that becomes even more astounding because it is easy to forget. But Africa is a continent, whereas these 5 countries are just countries. So when you look at it, one paper per 500,000 people is quite astounding. Not surprising, but it is astounding. Looking closer at the papers with African authors, we again, unsurprisingly perhaps, once again, unsurprisingly, see a massive imbalance, but this time it's among African countries, with South Africa producing far and away the bulk of geological research, followed by Egypt, Morocco, and Ethiopia. When we map out the number of articles about each African country, as you can see on the left, and the number of authorships from each country, the map on the right, we are once again struck by the differences among countries. It is clear the North and Southern African countries dominate, both in number of articles and in research output, likely because of geological interest, for whether it's academic or economic, and because they have active research communities. However, what's more interesting or more inexplicable is the poorly represented countries. Is there really no published material? Or is it just that this material happens to be in exploration reports rather than academic journals, or perhaps in non-English, for example, French journals, or in lower impact journals? These are questions that I'm actually really interested in and I think would be nice to follow up on. If we compare the publication of African geoscience in these high impact journals, the red dots on the left of this chart, with the total production of literature by these journals, the blue dot, over time, we can see that there's a striking increase in international research since the 1970s, whereas African output appears to be stagnant. Over this period, only 2.3% of geoscience literature is authored by Africans. To put this in perspective, single countries, for example, the USA, UK, and France, produce between 10 and 47% of this literature. It's incredible. While the Netherlands, a country home to only 17 million people, contributed an equivalent number of papers to Africa, home to 1.2 billion. As you can see here, the 5 years of highest output of African authored articles were in the 70s and 80s, while the lowest output years were more recent. However, this is obviously relative to total output. So it's not that African publications have decreased, but more that it hasn't increased at the same rate as the rest of the world's output. We were also interested in looking for possible explanations for this divergence in output. While there are likely many contributing factors, changes in research expenditure over the last 30 years corresponds remarkably well to the publication output. Basically, and unsurprisingly, money appears to buy research. So if you see the global average expenditure on research increases from $100 to $300 per person, whereas for Africa, it increases from $4 to $42 per person over the same time period. Similarly, when you compare academic salaries from 20 years ago, a full prof in the US was able to earn enough to ensure comfort, quality of life, and this also tends to lead to retention of academics within academia, as well as increasing the immigration of other academics to the US to try and attain this lifestyle. However, comparatively, Nigeria, they only earn $170 a month, and a Nigerian prof might need a second job in order to support his family or to maintain a decent quality of life. In these journals, we also looked at the 25 most highly cited papers per journal. These are the papers that, at least from an academic perspective, are most impactful, most read, and referred to. Only 13 of the over 2,000 authors of these papers were African. Interestingly, many of these so-called Africans actually had a non-African primary affiliation. And we didn't go into that because it becomes very difficult to define someone as African or not. However, many of these have co-affiliations with African institutions, which then leads you to wonder how many of them are actually African or whether they're based in Germany or elsewhere. So our take-home messages from this project paper presentation are that locally produced geoscience in Africa is limited. Most countries in the world produce more than twice the geological knowledge than that of Africa. There's a very remarkable intra-African imbalance, with more than 80% of authorships coming from only 5 countries. There's a disturbing lack of growth in African authored geoscience, particularly compared to international trends. And Africa has produced a very small proportion of the geoscience literature surveyed, comparable with a tiny little country like the Netherlands. And only 13 of the 2,000 authorships of the most cited articles are African. So to wrap up, we're not trying to make the case that foreigners should not come to work in Africa, but there must be some form of inclusion. Additionally, how much do Africans push for that inclusion? It's not possible to simply sit back and be a passive participant. Who is coming up in the wings behind the grates? And can the brain drain be halted or slowed? We actually didn't bring this up in the presentation, but we're referring to the exodus of top African scientists out of the continent. How will funders and governments promote strong geological research in Africa by Africans? And can universities and governments incentivize high impact research? So we realize that most of these are questions, but we don't actually have answers. We just actually want to bring up these questions so that other people can try and find the answers. So if anyone wants more detail or more information, as we said in the beginning of the presentation, you can find the paper in Earth Science Reviews. The link was shared in the chat. If you're unable to access the PDF, please just email us. We're happy to send it to you, share it with you. We think this is a topic that needs to get out, not because we're cool, but because this topic is a problem and it needs to be spoken about. And so thank you. I hope that was a good timing. I think it seemed to go faster than it should have, but I do talk fast. I'm very happy to take any questions, and I know some of my co-authors are on this call with me. So yeah, we're happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. Well, that was very interesting. I knew that African authors were underrepresented. I just didn't realize how badly underrepresented we are. Are there any questions? We'll take them live. Vladi, do you want to?
Yes, I have plenty of questions and comments.
Okay.
But I don't want to take up all the time, you know. So maybe you let other people come first.
Well, you start off. I will interrupt when you've spoken too much.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Hi, this is really an interesting. This is a very interesting work, and the problem is long known and long discussed. That's nothing new about it. I don't remember. I think like 15 or 20 years ago, I wrote a paper on that, on the same subject in the Journal of African Earth Sciences together with Pat Erickson. We have been also trying to give advice to African authors how to improve their input. And other subjects discussed on conferences, especially on the biannual colloquia of African geology, is, for example, the fraud that happens very often with foreign authors coming to Africa, exploiting African scientists, using their local knowledge and not including them in the papers. It happens very often. I think some of those numbers that were right now presented to us make Africa looking so bad, because we indeed have a much larger contribution from Africa, which is not reflected by the authorship. So we take people to the field, we spend field time with them, we go with them around, give them our local knowledge, we send the samples to them, they analyze the samples, and the results appear very often without African co-authorship. This is a problem that can only be treated by the societies and by the journals and by those authors that feel having been treated not fairly by their co-workers. But many of them hesitate to do this because it's a sort of exposure that is not pleasant. Then we have a lack of laboratories in Africa. So most of the analytical work is being done abroad, USA, Australia, UK, you name it, for funding that also does not come from Africa. Because, you know, having a fund of 500,000 rand makes me maybe allows me to sample 10 times and have 10 samples analyzed. You know, and I rather take a student or 2 or 3 students for that money and give them a bursary, hoping that they will learn. There is so many different aspects that were discussed already. I would actually like to discuss something else. I see that two major points in this thing. First of all, the 3 authors are 3 young people, females and 1 male. And I don't know exactly, but it looks to me though that their background is not really African. And certainly they are white. So this is one of the problems that we see all across Africa. There is plenty of excellent young people and they are more than welcome. And I was 40 years ago, one of them, coming to Africa and doing research in Africa. That's great. But, you know, the question is, why is that theme not taken up by Africans properly? And the second point is those much faster rising numbers of publication across the world than in Africa. That certainly is funded by the governmental lack of support of science. African universities suffer more and more and more and more over the 25 years, last 25 years. The support of African universities, when you count for inflation, has decreased tremendously. Student numbers have increased tremendously at the same time. The professors' salaries, they are not really very significant, I think. You know, South African professors, for example, earn better than German professors. So that is certainly not the reason. But students, young people that drive the research usually, they do not go into research. They go into the industry. They are the first generation people that start to earn money. And of course, they support their entire families. So they do not stay at universities. They go into industry and don't do research. That's maybe a major thing. And then there is also a sort of a flow in those numbers. The world has been forced to publish more and more and more. There is an increasing number of publications that is actually not justified by increasing science, but justified by increasing number of journals which all want to make money. In Africa, it is not like that. So I think at least 30% of that increase of numbers of publications in other places than Africa is just an artificial one, not really an increase.
That's a very valid point. Well, all of them are very valid points. I don't know if you want to talk.
Yeah, sorry, this is Warwick. I'm one of the co-authors on the paper. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you, Warwick.
Great. So I'm stuck behind a palm tree, it seems. Yeah, so Vladi, thank you for those comments. These are exactly, and you are quite right, we are 3 young white South Africans who've written this paper. And it was one of the ironies of getting it through, because we were focused on the paper. And then when we realized that it's now done and published, you almost feel a sense of embarrassment of like we are African, all of us by birth, but you know, we're white South Africans. And then after that, you sort of feel a bit embarrassed that, you know, could we not have included, you know, more Africans on this work?
Yeah, I know the feeling, yeah.
But the upshot is now this paper has created quite a lot of discussion. We've actually just been emailed by the French Geological Society by the president, who kind of wants to know more, and they have a whole program with collaborating with North Africa. So maybe this, instead of being the end of something, can be the start of something. And yes, I agree with your points, and particularly the institutional side of things, the fact that governments, you know, often lack the interest or the money to support geoscience research. And it's funny because, you know, mineral wealth, governments anywhere around the world love to jump on top of their mineral wealth as soon as they can. But the irony is that when you suggest that maybe doing research in geology can help unlock that mineral wealth, you know, you get stared at as if you're a crazy person, because this idea of being a scientist or a researcher is, you know, it's almost as though you're wasting your time. Like, oh, research is for people who are nerds, and not that you're going to contribute anything to society. And I think that systematic problem in Africa needs to change, that science shouldn't be seen as something that elitists do, but something that anybody can do. And certainly, what was your other point? It was about, I think it was about retention of staff. And you're dead right about the young people are going to be the researchers. And I have it with my students, and I'm sure you have the same, that as soon as they finish an honors or master's degree, you say, where are you going to go? And they say, well, I've got a job in industry because I now need to pay for my mom and my dad and my cousin and everything. And it's really quite tragic. I mean, it's good for our minerals industry, don't get me wrong, but for research, it's a pity, you know, people move out of that. Anyway, yeah, that's my 2 cents worth, but I totally agree with your points, you know, bang on. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
Everything. I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Avella. Avella, please unmute yourself.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Hello, everyone. I was actually quite intrigued by the presentation. I'm actually a student from the University of Pretoria, and I'm currently studying, doing my honors in geology. And I think I'd just like to comment on the both what Warwick said regarding how science shouldn't be seen as like an elite venture, and just get more emphasis on the fact that it's for everyone, really. And also how Vladi commented on the fact that you know, the lack of financial support or incentive from African government in terms of allowing, particularly with the rise in students coming into varsities, I think it is actually quite challenging as students, because, for example, as I'm doing my honors, I'm actually looking into going into the industry because I need to pay a student loan. So I think this actually is something that needs to be given more insight into. However, I was just wondering how though, I understand the fact that the publication of the paper has had an impact on this. Maybe there could be, I don't know, can there be more done, and how long will it take to actually give this issue more, I don't know,
More impact? More
impact? Yes, thank you. Yes.
So in terms of how long, I think, as Vladi said, I mean, this is a topic that's gone on for decades, I don't know, a long time. It's definitely not going to be resolved just because of this one paper. Like, we're not naive. And I also think the money isn't going to suddenly come towards researchers, because yes, okay, I think perhaps there can be a lot of criticism for governments not prioritizing research, but when you have the choices between paying for research versus paying for people's food or accommodation, or for even for like basic education, and I'm not going to get into that argument, that debate, but the point is there are lots of conflicting demands on the money. And I wouldn't say you should take it away from healthcare and put it into research. But I think one thing that could happen immediately would be for people to put more pressure on international researchers coming into the country, and just say, like, I'm happy to take you around, I'm happy to host you, but I am your equal, you know, I am a collaborator. Yes, you've got the money, yes, you can be first author, but like, I am going to be on this research. I think there definitely can be more pride in being an African academic, instead of sort of being humble and being, I'm happy to sort of help you around the field, but you're the glorious whatever nationality and you can publish it. You know, I think people can stand up for themselves and demand to be included, and then maybe also hold journals accountable. If you sort of see an unreasonable number of papers on a specific African formation, I'm using geological words, is write to the editor. Like, I don't know, get together and write a letter to the editor or correspondence and say, this is not acceptable, you know. This journal, Nature Geology or Nature Geoscience, was very bad in terms of the number of Africans included. So write a letter to the editor and say, this is not on. Like, you guys need to actually be held accountable for publishing papers that are clearly not including locals. And yes, of course, maybe the authors can respond and say, we tried, we contacted people and they didn't want to, that's fine. But I do think some of the easiest interventions would be just sort of standing up and demanding to be heard. But the funding situations and stuff are not going to change quickly. But yeah, you have interesting points. And I think getting a job when you finish studying is not exactly a bad thing. I mean, you do study to get work. So I think the trends in the US and the UK, where people do an undergrad and then they do a master's and they do a PhD and then they do postdoc number 1 and postdoc number 2. And yes, it all produces research, but you know, as a person who is in a postdoc, like, it would be nice to actually have a job. And sometimes, sometimes that sort of endless academic game is not, on a personal level, I don't think it's necessarily as healthy as going into industry and getting a job. So I do sympathize.
Lauren, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yes, hi guys. Sorry, this isn't Lauren. This is Andy Green here. I'm just sharing a computer with Lauren at the moment. I'm also from University of KwaZulu-Natal. It's just to kind of, I think, add a little to what Vladdy was saying, and perhaps some of the, you know, to highlight a few things. Let's take, for example, I think one of the biggest funded research enterprises in the world, which is the International Ocean Drilling Project. So this is a multi-million euro or dollar funded enterprise that essentially understands seafloor evolution from around the globe. And we've had multiple expeditions into South Africa's exclusive economic zone. So the zone in which we allow ships in and out, we allow mineral rights, we hold the mineral rights to, these guys have come in and they have done countless expeditions, a lot of drilling, which costs millions and millions of dollars to do, massive scientific careers built from this. And I can tell you now that the number of Africans involved, at least South Africans from South Africa's EEZ, is 0. Nobody's been involved. There's been no intimations towards anyone. So as the dominant marine geologist in the country, it's been interesting to never hear of these cruises or these forays into our waters. And when I challenged then the scientific director of the IODP, boils down to the fact that in order to be able to play with the big boys, you have to pay for the big boys. So everybody has to buy in through their governmental organizations into this, I guess, what is it? A group of people that are then involved in this program. And if your government doesn't do this, you have no place in this. And that's the thing which is chilling to me, is that the government itself just actually marginalizes its own scientists by not putting forward money into something as important as the IODP. So, you know, this is something which is actually creating careers across the world. It's generating massive revenue, whether it be through publishing, through students, through research, and all of the big universities around the globe. And I can tell you now, all of these universities are not centered anywhere near Africa. These are the universities in Europe and universities in mostly the West, so in Canada or in the US. And so, you know, we just see a systematic marginalization, not just from the fact that they don't want to invest their money or to pay for perhaps a berth on these cruises for us, but our government itself isn't interested. And no amount of lobbying really tends to change people's ideas. And so, you know, you really actually wonder, like, the futility of all of this. You know, we can stamp our feet and kick up a fuss, but if our own government's not really willing to support us, then I don't know. I don't know where we go from here. I guess those are just my 2 cents worth.
Andy, but so many journals have staggered publishing fees based on developing countries versus developed, or whatever term they happen to use for breakdown. Does this cruise, I don't know, what was it called?
IODP.
The IODP. Are they demanding equal contribution from all governments? Because to be quite honest, that is unacceptable as well. Yes, of course, the government should be supporting our research, but they are benefiting by researching our waters. So they should either have a discounted rate buy-in to get South African or African or whatever geologists on board, or even like a developmental, like one position where a person, you know, different people can apply to be that scholarship boy on the ship. Don't you think? Like, it's not talking about handouts, but like, you cannot expect Congo to put forward the same amount proportionally as the US or Canada.
So no, yes, it is a staggered fee, but the fee itself is still pretty large, and it just allows you buy-in to be a part of some of the decision making on the body that deals with where cruises go and what scientific questions get asked, you know, so the guys would say yes or no. And even then, you know, just it's a fairly large sum for us working in rands, as you can imagine, because these fees are either in euros or they're in dollars. And as the exchange rates fluctuate, you can imagine it becomes more and more inaccessible to us. Besides that, it's just, who do you contact here? How do you get people interested? Because, you know, from my perspective, geosciences as a research-based entity in the country is strongly marginalized. You know, it's driven by the fact that we have had, and perhaps not so much now, but a very strong economic base driven by mining. So mining houses took care of their own. It was a lot driven by mining money and sort of, I guess, third stream incomes from mines to drive research. What we sit with now is the fact that that's not really happening. And the National Research Foundation or the Department of Science and Technology are not actually playing the game. So, you know, that pot of money itself has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So we're really running on, like, you know, the bare bones of things. But it's just that, you know, why will the National Research Foundation care about a new type of rock or a set of rocks that have been discovered with a particular environmental significance? Everything has to be driven by some sort of thing that's going to solve the hunger crisis in the world, you know, AIDS, cancer, that sort of thing, because that is, unfortunately, we live in a third world country where we have to have things that change the status quo in terms of the brown issues around living in Africa, which is things like sanitation and health. And so, you know, geology as just a general science is not particularly well supported. And then you go to, say, the DST and you say, listen, we need this. And, you know, it's not exactly something that's going to be particularly forthcoming. I don't know, in the last few days, I've sat and mulled this over quite a lot, and I've had a lot of interaction through Twitter and through a number of other editors. So I've emailed your paper around. I've had major interactions with the editors at Nature Geoscience just over this. And, you know, it's just met with apathy. No, I mean, this quote here is quite good. Editors are not accountable. Yes, they are. I am an editor of several journals, and I should be accountable for what I allow into my journal and whether I perpetuate the imbalances that are being driven by parachute science. And, you know, these are the things that, I don't know, it's just a massive frustration as an academic for me at the moment. I just wonder where we're going to go as a country.
Indeed, a very interesting question. We need to move on. Let's ask Sarah first, then we'll come back to you, Vladdy, after Sarah has asked her question.
Thank you.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Nolene had to have a conversation with me yesterday just to make sure it's working. So I think it's working.
Yep, you're loud and clear.
Okay, great. I'm actually one of those industry members that you are referring to, and it is quite a topic that's quite close to my heart. There's sort of people that feel a lot of passion about certain topics, but I specifically feel that in industry we're spending a lot of money to find out specifics about economics, but we don't always go and publish that material into journals. And I think that maybe there should be a greater bridge between both academia and industry. And I do understand that a lot of the data will be sensitive, because obviously that's why in industry you will be doing work is to make money. But I do think that that's possibly where some of us African sort of geologists could also make a bit of a bigger impact, is by taking just a portion of the rocks and the insight that we have from industry and maybe returning that back to academia. That's just my thoughts.
And I would say most academics, maybe even all academics, would absolutely love to collaborate. They'd love to have those opportunities. And I would hope would be very willing to work closely with industry to actually bring that knowledge to the academic sphere.
Yeah, I think it's just tough, you know. Obviously, like I say, in industry, everything is dictated by the bottom line, and that's what you want. And I think that's, I don't know how we would do it, and obviously it hasn't been done before, because generally, as a company, it's all their IP if they're paying for it. But I think that's something that we as people within the industry should be looking at, as to how we can contribute and help people start publishing more.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.
We look forward to hearing or receiving your paper for publication.
Yeah, me too. I am working on it, but it's, yeah, like I say, unfortunately, my boss screaming takes priority over my beautiful rocks of Mozambique. So, but I am trying. So I'm hoping that I will be a good example.
Great stuff. Bloody, would you like to make your comment?
Yes, I have basically two comments. One to Andy. Yes, everything he described is correct, but I don't think this is a major problem. Because indeed, why should African governments contribute to projects that maybe do not even happen in Africa? They certainly have much more important problems to deal with, to spend money on. And secondly, I think that all of the subjects discussed now are reasons for the poor appearance of Africans as authors in science. But they are just sort of side reasons. They are not the main reasons. In my opinion, the main reason is that in Africa, we really do not have a population that is as well educated, because it's not wealthy enough and because it has its colonial past behind it. So if you look at USA, Germany, UK, whoever, you know, the schools are better, the universities are better, there is more money into so many subjects that affect science. Technology is there, while in Africa, people mainly try to fight hunger, sanitation, misery, and health problems, and so on and so forth. So there is a different emphasis on important subjects than in other countries. I think that's the biggest problem. And therefore, in Africa, we do not have so many scientists. It would be nice to see how many percentage of population of Africa have a matric. How many of them, how many percent went to university, and how many percent ended up in science? I'm sure that it will be far behind all the other continents and all the other countries. This is the major problem, and that needs to be addressed. That is something that takes decades. Africa is already working on it since decades. not always with the right measures. I think the politicians, especially African politicians, also have a very, very poor impact on this. And finally, a question to the authors, to the three authors. Why did you choose not an African journal to publish your article, but an international Elsevier journal? Although it, I think quite nice to see it, and it would address Africans, you know. The Earth Science Reviews is not widely read across Africa, and most of the African countries, I would say 90%, cannot even afford it. The libraries at the universities will not be able to afford it.
So that is a very interesting question. The reason we decided deliberately to not aim for an African journal is because we actually thought that we wanted to shake the international readership. So we didn't, our sort of aim for this paper was not actually to target African readers. We thought it was important to target international readers who are doing this parachute science. And so that was the deliberate selection of an international higher impact journal, because we thought that would get a broader readership. But it is true, we probably should have gone for an open access journal that would actually be more accessible to African readership.
Sorry, can I step in here? The funny thing is, in contacting the journals, I contacted Tim Horscroft at Earth Science Reviews, as well as Gillian Folger, expressing that, you know, we have this paper and what do they think of it? And Tim actually suggested Journal of African Earth Science and copied in, I forget the chap's name. I think he's at Oklahoma State, but he's the editor of Journal of African Earth Science. And he was
Muhammad Abdus-Salam.
He
was not interested.
He
said, no, this paper will not attract readership in Africa. And that was kind of the end of it. So
it supported our decision.
And so anyway, we got a lot of support from Earth Science Reviews, which was nice. It took a long time to review because it's difficult to find reviewers for this kind of work, because they need to be geologists, but they also don't need to be too much of a geologist, if you know what I mean. So
yes, this is something. I have a similar experience, even while I was one of the editors of the Journal of African Earth Sciences many years ago and wrote that paper I told you about. The journal decided not to publish it on the journal pages, but on the web. So it was open, publishers open access on the web, but not on the pages. I found very disappointing. But I think the general approach to the problem can only come from Africa. And if the improvement of that does not come from Africa, it will not come from outside. So it's on African scientists to change it, and demand a change.
That is true.
Not on Europeans or Americans to defend the Africans.
No, that is valid. That is a very valid point. Thank you.
I just have one very quick question before we close off. If I understand you correctly, there's a push for anybody who's been involved with the project to be included in the authorship. You don't think you're going to land up with 17 authors on a paper, all of which did nothing except provide field support?
No, I don't think, I definitely don't think anyone who's included on the project should be, maybe I phrased it wrong. I think people who deserve, I mean, authorship does need to be earned, but it also needs to be offered. So I think if someone does provide considerable support, they should definitely be offered authorship, and then they should also do what authors need to do, which either analyzing data or contributing to writing up the manuscript, or definitely not the whole team. I do see what you're saying with that.
I disagree. I would like to comment on that.
Okay.
I think it really depends on how much you put in. If you lead a team through the field for weeks, point out the good outcomes, show them the interesting questions in the field, tell them where to drill, tell them, you know, do the stratigraphy, contribute the entire local knowledge, without which they could not even do the work they wanted. That's very often the case. Then you should be an author. If you collected samples, if you send samples to someone, and they analyze it and find out that this sample is a meteorite from I don't know where, you know, you should be co-author of that paper, because it's you that found the sample and found something interesting on that sample, even if you don't have the analytical possibilities that other countries have, and so on and so forth.
But every
That's many times, and sorry, I remember there was 3 or 4 times in the last 20 years there were letters to Nature published on the pages of Nature, that subject. So it's really nothing new. But as I said previously, I don't think this is the major reason.
Lots of questions, lots of comments, so much to do and so much interesting things. Unfortunately, we have to close now. Thank you all very much for your questions, your comments. And Michelle, we look forward to hearing the next episode of this very interesting presentation.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And at that, we're going to close off. Craig, can you close the meeting for everybody, please? Or no?
I will close for everybody. Thank you, everybody, for pitching. It's been a very interesting discussion period. So thanks once again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And Michelle, I will write you an email.
Yes, please do. I'd love to hear your ideas.
It will take me a little bit of time.
Yes.
One final thing we have to do. We have an August sponsor, do we not? Was it Pito and Associates?
Yes, it is, Craig.
Yes. Thank you for helping to sponsor these meetings as well. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'll end the meeting now.
Thank you.
Bye.